Good afternoon, guys. Welcome back. The conversations continue. We are now joined by Zamani Ngidi, who is a senior client manager, cyber solutions at Aon South Africa. Zamani, welcome.
So much appreciated for having me.
Good thing. Maybe just to start this conversation, what's your message that you brought to the conference?
This is interesting. So what I wanted to tell people today at the conference this week is that we need to think about cybersecurity a little bit differently. So my conversations were really around how do we integrate cyber governance, cybersecurity and cyber insurance into one holistic value chain so that there's considerations if a vendor does something wrong that leads to a loss, that there will be some liability attached, and effectively insurance can help in that conversation.
Can you give us kind of an overview of the South African cybersecurity insurance and how the market is growing?
Yeah, sure. So I think the market had pre-COVID about 900 million rands worth of coverage that could be purchased. And then after COVID, obviously everyone started working from home, started seeing a lot more claims because a lot of the companies weren't mature enough to work remotely. And effectively, a lot of that capacity left, right? So we're now sitting at somewhere in the ballpark of about 500 million rands worth of insurance locally. It's more mature. We have kind of a variety of carriers that help and facilitate there. Yeah. But yeah, it's a maturing market, and I think as it develops, it will continue to do so.
And for those who have no idea about cybersecurity insurance, can you briefly tell us how does this work?
Oh, sure.
And also, do you guys do due diligence, and how do you do that?
Yeah, sure. So. Cyber insurance, very broadly, it's an incident response matter. It's an incident response policy that has an attachment of a liability. So what that means is that when a breach happens, it's going to fix the incident at the immediate sense to kind of stop it from proliferating out to the rest of the business. And then anything that's systemic from the event itself, whether it be business interruption, liability, people suing you as a result of their data being breached, the insurance is going to pick up on that. So very broadly, that's how it would, that's how the insurance works. And then from a due diligence, what they call is more specifically the underwriting phase, right? So how do insurers make the right assessment as to how your risk is? What they'll do is they'll basically give out a questionnaire and highlight what controls do you have, right? So very similarly to yourself in your own personal capacity, they'll ask you, what kind of car do you drive? What's the color? Where do you travel most of the time? Just they have a risk profile and they build from there. So they look at things across industry, how many data records you have, what revenue you're making, do you have the right controls, do you have a designated CIO, et cetera, and that gives them a view as to what, how they should be rating the risk.
Okay, interesting. And in the event of a client experiencing a breach, what are some of the steps that you guys take to try and protect your clients?
So, I mean, when a breach is taking place, that's kind of when the proverbial pawpaws hit the fan. What we do prior to is really help a client understand and plan for a breach. So we'll help them around implementing things like business continuity, IT disaster recovery, how that ties into it from an incident response perspective. And we also make sure that their tech stack is actually speaking to their business appropriately, right? So do they, from a cloud infrastructure perspective, do they have the right liability agreements with their contractors that if something happens in a third-party environment that affects them, how they can assist. But when an incident happens, the way that the insurances work is that you basically would call someone, they would immediately it would actually go through what they call an incident response manager, which is typically a legal advisor, so to protect the contents of the breach under legal privilege, and then they'll basically project manage it, right? So make sure that there's incident responders, forensic investigations are taking into consideration, and crisis response, etc. So it's a very immediate way of how things work, and as well as kind of building a what we call a war room, so that all the stakeholders in the business are kept abreast of the processes that are developing.
Interesting. As we move on, I think sometime in February, the info regulator mentioned that the breaches are increasing, probably looking at 150 per month. And ABSA recently said they've experienced about 400% increase. What are you seeing from your side in terms of reports and claims?
Yeah, so I think reporting is very delicate, right? Because at the moment in South Africa, the reporting is, I think, and I stand in the correction, but it's only required when customer information is impacted, right? So someone can have a material breach that might impact their customers from an ability to deliver a service. So that won't be reported, but you may find that you're saying that I will give you access to a specific software, and if I breach recovery time objectives of 5 hours and your breach is lasting 12, there's a penalty in the contract that won't be reported. But we're seeing at least on a month-to-month basis across stats from a global instance, as well as kind of Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, that there is an increase. And there's there's a maturation of the risk both within South Africa and kind of the rest of the world.
Okay, interesting. And as we move forward, I think by regulations, companies, they need to report in the event of a breach. If they're claiming, do they need to inform the regulator? Do they still need to report the issues once they're claiming from insurance?
Again, I think that would be specific to the matter, right? So if you have a breach that is only impacting security systems but not customer data, an information regulator actually doesn't need notification. So what typically happens is that process goes through, again, an incident response manager, which is usually a legal provider, and they would give and advise a client, give them the commensurate kind of advice as to whether or not they have to notify the regulator. And if they do notify them, what do they disclose? So they kind of hold their hand, because the way that those providers work, they obviously have a lot of experience in dealing with these breaches. So it's super useful having people that have the horse cause, so to speak.
Okay. No, thank you. Zamani, we can't conclude this conversation without looking at the ballooning SME ecosystem in the country.
Yeah.
And you guys, is there a product that is specifically made for SMEs?
Yeah, 100%. So we've looked at the value chain for SMEs specifically, right? What are their concerns, and what insurances do they feel are appropriate? So one of the things we saw was obviously their architecture doesn't have the prerequisite sophistication as a bank, as well as the resources, right? So we said, look, there's some basic things that they need. And we basically bundled that into a security tool, and we found an insurance provider that is willing to protect an SME company based on those controls. So we bundled and said, look, if you have this antivirus, you're doing this this vulnerability scanning, et cetera, we can bundle it, and if anything goes wrong, we'll cover you up to 10 million. And that's a product that we have at Aon. And again, it's a bundle solution, and it's the price point is actually quite acceptable. We do allow SMEs to pay on a monthly basis. So again, reducing the capital requirements to deploy that particular solution in the environment.
Zamani, thank you so much for your time. Guys, keep watching. More conversations are coming up on ITWeb Security TV. Thank you.